On the 30th of March, we finally moved out of the castle, sometime in the afternoon, accompanied by our guards and the whole of the commandator, staff interpreters, censors, and so on. Although few of us were in much shape physically, everyone was in the highest spirits, knowing that the American troops were not far away, and we were in the sound of perpetual gunfire. The secret wireless, the Canary as it was called, had to be dismantled before we set out, so exact news was not readily to hand. As far as I can recall, we marched during 2 nights, lying up each day in farm buildings in different villages, watching the retreat of the various elements of the German army and its enforced allies. I suppose we had covered some 30 miles eastwards from Spangenberg when we reached a considerable river, the Werra, which some of us thought might temporarily delay the American advance. During the night, I and 1 or 2 others managed to remove ourselves from the column. Not a very difficult operation, as the guards were elderly and tired. With Ronnie Swain, a very good companion in such an adventure, and 1 or 2 more, we endured 2 further days and nights of acute discomfort in the surrounding woods. Early April rain was heavy, cold and infinitely wetting, and there was an unpleasant, eerie feeling in the seemingly empty countryside, with shells passing overhead. In fact, there were little groups of escaped prisoners and refugees all over the place, as well as bodies of armed Hitler Jugend, hair-triggered adolescents to be avoided at all costs. We established ourselves in quite a good position of observation and were finally able to see the American troops crossing the valley beneath us. Not all were immediately friendly at being greeted by a group of sodden ragamuffins. I remember being rather shocked at the amount of rings they had on their fingers, presumably looted. Rapport was finally established, and after some delay, we were dispatched in a lorry to the local town of Eschweg and handed over to the workshop detachment of the American Army, who were using the deserted airfield to repair vehicles. Their personnel were veritable Vulcans and worked day and night mending tanks and lorries, which had broken down in the headland advance. Their commanding officer loaded us up with food and gave us, we were perhaps 20 by now, ancient French rifles and cartridges, asking us to guard the airfield perimeter against stray Germans, as he had no troops to spare. We organised ourselves into shifts, periods of patrolling interspaced with rest, in a not very luxurious barracks. Luckily, our military prowess was not called upon. In the end, most of the inhabitants of the camp arrived in dribs and drabs, and certain senior officers began flexing their muscles. By now the airfield was being used by American Dakotas, flying in petrol for advancing forces, and it was arranged we should be taken to their base at Luxembourg in the empty returning planes. It was a memorably cold flight, as to facilitate the swift unloading of the fuel drums, the rear doors had to be removed, and we were subjected to an icy draught as we lay huddled on the floor. Fortunately, some of us had equipped ourselves with German parachutist smocks, which were very warm and had fur-lined hoods. The pilot and his loaders were none too happy about some odd German fighters said to be on suicide missions, so that it was a relief to touch down in the Grand Duchy. Here we were speedily entrained the same day to Paris, and were ensconced that night, after a reasonable supper, in the Hotel Scribe. It was an uncanny joy to have a room to oneself, to have a bath, and the luxury of sleeping in sheets.